Okay. Thanks, Tina, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to be a part of your community day. It's a really fun thing to be a part of something like this, especially because there's so many various experts on in a day like today, and so I get to be picked as the history person for your history lesson for today. So my name is Noel Cilker. I am a Bay Area native. I grew up in San Jose and was raised there for 18 plus years. Then I went to school at St. Mary's College. And then, after a few years after that, I went to New York and left the area for a little bit and realized that, you know what? It was really the West Coast that really still held my interest and my passion. So I came back here and been now in Berkeley for over 10 years. And this story that I've researched for quite a long time is based in San Francisco, centered in the gold rush. And yes, you heard correctly when Tina said 12 years. That was, uh, it's a little longer than I wish to admit, but yes, it took that long for me to research all this stuff, to come up with some of the extra characters, and to rewrite the whole story after I'd already written it once. Lots of editing, lots of beta readers to help me figure things out, some sensitivity readers, some cultural sensitivity readers, and finally, at long last, I got this thing published. Whoops, and I'd like to share a little bit of what I learned in that whole process with you today. And if you are also a Bay Area native, this might give you a little bit more insight about the place where you live. And if you're not a Bay Area native and you're signing in from elsewhere, welcome. And I'm excited that you're here. And hopefully this will entice you to at least make a visit. So with my slideshow, I'd like to start. Thank you to Trevande for having me here. This is really a nice opportunity. So this is the cover of my book that I just published. It's called The Boy and the Brothel Madam. And it's centered around this teenage boy who starts in New York and makes, it's about 1849, so it's the year that the gold rush really starts. He sails around to Panama. The canal hadn't been built yet, so he traipses through the jungle with a bunch of other people. And on the other side of the coast, he picks up the ship and continues on to San Francisco. And once in San Francisco, he is confronted with this really strange phenomenon of a town that was barely a town, um, becoming this focal point in history where everyone is crashing into this very small area. And along the way, he meets this woman named Ah Toy. Ah Toy is really who I'm going to be focusing on today. She is a very young Chinese woman from the southern part of China in the Canton province. And she was someone who, when I was studying history at Fordham University in New York, I was looking around for a story after my thesis was finished. And I thought, I really love this stuff. I want to become a writer. It was her story that I happened to stumble across in my search for something to write about. And of course, being in New York, I happened across this story that was centered in the Bay Area. So that geographically, it didn't quite line up for my time in New York. But once I got back to the San Francisco area, that's when I really started to pick up my interest and my research on her. Now, before I really get into it, I want to acknowledge something. You'll see on the screen here um, my face looking very collegial, or at least attempting to. And you'll see that I am not a Chinese person. I am indeed a white person. And some of you might think, what right does he have to tell a Chinese person's story? In addition to that, a Chinese woman's story. And it's a very good question. And it's one that I was confronted with by agents and editors and other authors who said, you're going to have a really tough time, especially in this day and age with concerns about cultural appropriation. So here's why I did it. First of all, it was a story that really captivated me because Atoy, whom you'll see in a little bit, was, even though she was quite young, she was just in her early 20s, she was really someone that grabbed my attention in that the strength that she had in a very challenging environment in a male-dominated gold rush. Um, I was quite surprised and taken with how she not only survived that environment, but how she took charge of it. Um, and the fact that I married into a Chinese family that had a little bit of like a special um, resonance with me. So what I tried to do is be very careful and sensitive when telling her story by making sure that I researched as much as I possibly could to get her story correct. I had some cultural sensitivity readers go through it and make sure that the way that I had her speaking, for example, was historically accurate and authentic, as well as some of the cultural things that I have in the book, such as how she decorated her brothel, the things that she wore, etc. So yes, I'm a little bit culturally removed in one sense, but I hope, and hopefully you can see this today, that I did my best to make sure that her story is told authentically. So I wanted to address that first so that maybe you weren't so concerned as we move forward. All right. So the question that I want to start you off with today is, Atoy, is she an admirable person? The answer is not going to be yes or no, because like most people, real life people in history, we all have complicated uh, stories, backgrounds, and goals, and the way we get to where we are and how we go about doing things. And it changes as once we're young, and then once we get older with a little more wisdom. But what I'm interested in is, how admirable do you think she really is? A little bit, a lot bit. So this is a question that you can answer for yourself. You can ask me questions a little bit later on, but I'm going to present you with a complex story that hopefully you can then answer this question for yourself. Or if you go away from this presentation not really knowing, that's okay too. I used to teach American history at the high school level, and we did this kind of thing all the time. I didn't care really what the right answer was for students. If they could answer in any way, as long as they provided evidence and reasonings for their answers, then I was a happy teacher. So I hope for the same for you. Okay, so is she admirable? Let me tell you a little bit about who she was. So she was the first Chinese brothel madam in San Francisco history. She showed up right at the start of the gold rush in the early year of 1849. And the question that I get all the time is, well, what did she look like? Because photography at the time was just in its beginning phases. Most of the images I have are of drawings of the area, San Francisco and other scenes, but there is not one image, either a photograph or a drawing, that I've been able to locate that is undisputable or indisputably Atoy. However, I do have descriptions. San Francisco is full of men, and in a place full of men, when a woman walks by, they take notice. So I have a few descriptions of her that maybe will help us understand, who was this woman and what did she look like? So the first one, Very simple. A very handsome Chinese girl. Okay, so that was from Elisha Crosby. The next one is from the Daily Alta, California, the newspaper of record at the time. They said that she was blooming with youth, beauty, and rouge. Another traveler, pioneer, said that the strangely alluring Ah Choi with her slender body and laughing eyes. And lastly, Charles Duane called her a tall, well-built woman. In fact, she was the finest looking woman I have ever seen. All right, so she was a good-looking person. So what did she do with those good looks? Well, that will come soon after she gets to San Francisco. First, we see that she starts in Canton. Here's a map of China. Canton is right there at the bottom, circled in red. And in 1849-ish, she's about 20 years old, she and a husband that she has at the time decide to make the trip. So they climb aboard a clipper ship in Canton, and they make their way across the sea, Pacific Ocean. They stop in Hawaii to pick up supplies, and they hang a left turn, and up they go to San Francisco, which had just recently, by the way, been renamed San Francisco from its earlier version, which was Yerba Buena. Now, somewhere along this path of red arrows, her husband passes away. This was a 45 to 60-day trip from China to San Francisco. And that means there was a lot of time to catch some sort of disease. We don't know what he caught, but since he was young, it was certain that he caught something. And somewhere along the way on his trans-Pacific boat ride, he passes away, which means that Atoy arrives in San Francisco a widow, a very young widow, but a widow nonetheless. So she has a few options. What do I do? She could jump on the next ship back and head back home, or she can do what she ultimately does and stay in San Francisco. So why would she stay? Because this is a very important moment for her. This a very big decision point. She ultimately stays, and we have a newspaper article that describes this very thing. All right, let me go back here. I'm going to try to move my thing here so that I can read it. Okay, there we go. So in the Daily Alta, California, she's in court, one of the many times which you'll see, and the newspaper reported on this. And in the court case transcript, the reporter who was there said that Atoy immigrated to this country for the purpose of bettering her condition, and that she's anxious to make California her permanent home and not to return to China. There were a lot of reasons not to return to China, and I'll get into some of those just a little bit later. Okay, so her husband dies. She's in San Francisco. She now has to figure out what to do. Here we go. This is what San Francisco looked like right about the time she arrived. You'll notice that we got a bunch of ships in the harbor, some wooden buildings, but if you take a look at the right-hand side here, a lot of tents. People weren't really interested in making San Francisco their permanent home. It was more of a way station to go to the gold fields in the foothills of Sierra Nevada. And the goal was to then make your fortune and go back home, whether that was to the East Coast or South America or China. And so a lot of these houses and buildings are sort of haphazard and scattered around, nothing really permanent. Um, and so people from all over the world are entranced by this gold rush and make their way to this port. And you'll see in this drawing by one of the pioneers here in one of his journals, he really encapsulates the diversity that you'll see. So this is in a saloon, which was in Portsmouth Square in San Francisco. And you'll see on the left side, you have some guys from South America. Chile was an especially popular origin point for some of the South American miners. You have some people from the United States, which California was not yet part. And so uh, even the Americans from the East Coast were considered foreigners. Then you see some Chinese folks with their hats, and many of them had the long braids going down their backs called queues. And I don't know if you can see, yeah, there we go. The guy in the red shirt in the chair, you got to have your drunk. And then you have a couple of dogs there rounding out the crowd. So California, especially San Francisco, was quite diverse. This is what Autoy would have seen. In that diversity, she noticed, well, a lot of these guys are guys. So if I am a beautiful woman, and if this is a town full of men, what is the quickest way for me to make a buck? And that's when she says, I think I'm going to start something that is going to guarantee eyeballs wherever I go. And so she starts a peep show. Where exactly? Well, if you take a look at this old map, you'll see that Portsmouth Square in that red box, that's really the center of town. And if you look a little bit below that, I don't know if you can see my mouse at all, you'll see that the shoreline here actually at the beginning went all the way up to Montgomery Street. Now, now that's all filled in. But the the wharfs, the piers, the ships would go right into that area there where you see that black number 3. And it was just a short walk to Portsmouth Square, which is really the center of town at the time. Now it's part of Chinatown. But at the time, that was where everyone gathered. So that's where Atoy sets up. She has a canvas tent and she creates a partition wall pretty much down the middle, drills some holes into it, and behind it is a stage where she does her thing. And then on the other side is where all the miners line up. They pay their 1 ounce of gold, which at the time was about $19. Today's dollars, that's about 670. And per peep, per performance, she charged that much. So she was very quickly one of the richest women in San Francisco. So, what exactly did her peep shows look like? We don't know. But we have sort of an idea. Just want to remind you, this is not Atoy. We don't have any pictures of her. This is actually a dancer from the 1940s named Jaden Wong. But I wanted to put this image up here because it's very, from the description that we have, this is a very similar pose that Atoy would have struck in front of these dirty, crusty, grizzled miners who are peeping through the wall. So what I'd like to do is do my first reading from my book that describes exactly, or pretty close, to what one of Atoy's peep shows would have looked like. So this is from the point of view of Cyrus. Cyrus is that white boy, if you can remember, that teenager who came from New York uh, up through Panama to San Francisco. His brother Lex and he have made their way into the tent. In front of us, in the flickering lantern light, was a canvas wall with a dozen or so holes, about eye height, bored into it. Half of them were occupied by other men who stood peering through to whatever was on the other side. Lex, his brother, spotted a pair of holes side by side, and guided me to one whilst he shucked off his hat and took the other. A deafening gong crashed once more, and I jumped as the men around me raised a throaty cheer. Lex pointed to the hole. The other men were already peeking through, boyish and eager. I peered in and saw a raised platform in the middle of the room. Lanterns stood in front and along the gates or along the sides, yet there was nothing happening. What are we looking at? I asked Lex. That. And at that moment, a leg knifed out of the shadows, sharp and entirely naked. It explored the stage, probing for purchase, tapping here and bending there, sliding in and out of the light until it issued forth and grew until whatever was attached to it slowly and silkily emerged from the shadow. The knee led, then the thigh, then the shin, then the ankle, all bare. Just this sent the men to full-mooned howling. In the next moment, a dress appeared, the borderline between flesh and cloth resting at the top of the thigh. One man whistled. The rest of the body poured out of the darkness like liquid and revealed a celestial. I'm going to pause here. A celestial was an old-timey word for a Chinese person because China used to refer to itself as the celestial kingdom. All right. Revealed a celestial, tall and flawless, with not a blemish nor line on her golden skin, and lips painted the color of cherry. She wore a sort of silk robe with a flower print on it, yet the men weren't noticing her clothing. Rather, it was that the robe couldn't contain the woman's appendages, which drew slavering from those in the audience. The men whooped with uncontained joy. Now, in full view of the middle of the stage, the woman stood still, hands posed on her hips, never once peeping in their direction, waiting for something. One man exhorted her to take it off, yet the woman batted nary an eyelash at the plea. Only a slight smile played at her lips. I could not stop staring. Someone began stomping on the ground in a rhythmic manner. The others joined in, creating a thunderous effect. Stomp, 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 stomp. The woman responded, starting slowly, with as smooth a movement as a ripple. She began to spin. Then again, gradually picking up speed. 5 times she twirled, each revolution revealing more and more leg as the robe fanned out. Then, putting her foot down in a dramatic stomp of her own, while the robe wrapped itself around her, she strutted across her stage, pushing each leg out as far as the slit in her robe would allow. The skin reflected the light as though it were another lantern, and the men hooted and hollered and called out scandalous things, yet nothing flapped her. Lex flushed with excitement as we stood in the middle of Clay Street after it was all over. "What you think?" he asked. "Well," I replied, "isn't she something?" "She is beautiful." "Ha ha, yes, that's my boy." He clapped me on the shoulder and beamed, a wild glint in his eye. So that's how Atoy makes her first living. And she becomes so popular that the line of men trying to get into her establishment, it was said, wrapped around the entire block. And every now and then, in order to keep everyone behaving, someone would pull a pistol out and brandish it to make sure all the men stayed in line. So she's rich at this point, but she knows that she can do more. She knows that with this much hunger in these men to see a female, she can turn this into something even more for herself. So what does she do? Well, she packs up and she moves just a couple blocks away to what is now Waverly Place in San Francisco. and she creates a brothel. Now, again, this is not Atoy, and this is not her brothel, but what's one that I thought might approximate what she had. We think that she had a two-story brothel where people come in through the ground floor, check in with her, and then go up to one of the rooms for the evening. She becomes even more popular, and customers are just knocking down the door to use her services. This gets the attention of other people in the town, especially those who decide, that's a rich woman over there. I wonder if we can make some money off of her. And so a lot of the uh, a lot of the people who go to the gold or go to San Francisco because of the gold rush are there for gold. Some of the people go to the gold rush in San Francisco and in California to make money off of the miners digging for gold. They called it mining the miners. And these are the people who sold shovels, um, pans, clothing, tents, all the supplies that one needs in the gold fields. Other people thought, well, there's a lot of money out there to be had, and I'd like to grab some of it. I don't want to dig in the fields. I don't want to be a merchant. And some of these people decide I'm going to mine the people who are there. And two of these people, I'm not going to get too much into them, but in the book, one of them is somewhat prominent. His name is Norman Ah Sing, and he is this older Chinese man who arrives in San Francisco and sees that this is a rich woman, and he sees an opportunity. So he shows up at her door and says, I'm looking around here and I see that you have a very popular establishment. It sure would be a shame if one of these white people came and put you out of business, if this building went up in flames, but I can protect you. I have a loyal following here in Little China, and I can protect you from this. But all it takes is just a small fee. So basically, it's a pretty run-of-the-mill extortion attempt. Atoy has a lot to lose, so it would be very understandable if she says, "I'll take that deal." But the cool part about Atoy, and one of the reasons why I was really drawn to her story, is she stands up to him and says, "I think you better leave." Now, this guy is not used to being refused, and he is a little bit shocked by it. So what he does is he starts to do a little bit of a revenge campaign, and you'll see she she starts to get drawn into court for things that maybe are technically against the law, but really people aren't paying too much attention to because San Francisco is such the Wild West at the time. No one's enforcing the laws all that much. So the fact that she gets drawn into all these disputes, it smells a little fishy. And my hypothesis is that because she refused this powerful neighborhood boss, she starts to get harassed in a legal way. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I have here a picture of the alcalde's office. The alcalde is kind of the governor slash mayor, the person in charge in San Francisco. They used his office as a courtroom. So I'm going to go through just briefly some of the things that Atoy was called into court for, because she was a very popular woman and very well known to the papers and the public. So first, she's drawn into court because of what's called brass filings. When she was a peep show dancer, she wanted 1 ounce of gold per peep. Some of the guys realized that, brass looks a lot like gold. I'm going to pay in that. What they didn't count on was that brass is also twice as light, so it would take twice as much when they were doing the scales um, to to balance out. And so she got suspicious and said, I don't think that's gold paying me. So she went to court and accused some of the miners for cheating her out of her pay. And in fact, that's one of the big points in this book is that Cyrus, the teenager, gets drawn into that uh, that her world because he is paying a debt because his brother is actually one of the ones who cheated her just before they go into the scene that I just read. All right, so she's drawn into court for that. She's drawn into court in 1850 for being a public nuisance. In March 1851, she gets a strange letter, and it's from her husband, according to the person who wrote this. He says, "This is your husband in Hong Kong. Please return to me. I miss you so much." Well, the authorities in San Francisco go, "Well, I think you better go. It sounds like your husband really misses you." She knows it's a trick and says, "I'm not going. Yes, I had a husband, but he's gone. He died on the way." They, of course, get confused and they have a court case to settle it. And it's determined that it may have been Norman Ah Sing, our neighborhood boss, who wrote that letter himself. In 1851, in November, she's cited for a disorderly house. And in December of that year, she's in court because of a stolen pin. Now, this is something that I want to share with you. This is a newspaper article from that case. And this will give you a little bit of a sense of Atoy's personality and how she didn't suffer any fools. She was not someone who messed around, which, if you're going to be a brothel madam, is a very important skill to have. Okay, so this is called Immense Excitement. And that top line is blocked for me because of Zoom. So I'm going to go down to the second line there. It says, "That portion of the city in the vicinity of the plaza was aroused by a certain nondescript noise, which, on further investigation, was found to be a series of musical screechings performed by Miss Atoy, and resembling somewhat of a prolonged cry, interspersed with the clatterings of a gong, or other similar instrument, with which religious rites are performed in the Celestial Empire. When we arrived near the spot whence the outcry was proceeding, we found her in full chase after a suspicious-looking individual, who had the appearance of being a volunteer to the Indian War. The thief kept ahead for a time, but Atoy was too swift for him, seized him by the collar, very much in the style of a police officer, and demanded a diamond pin which he and his party had taken away from her, after politely visiting her house and taking a drink with her." I love this image of her because in some cases, or in some accounts actually, people thought, well, she was from China and she was kind of this doll-like creature with bound feet. And I thought, okay, so maybe she has bound feet, which was that uh, 1800s and before practice of binding a feet in order to attract men. Well, I look at this story and I see that she is chasing a man around and cuffs him by the collar, very much in the style of a police officer. And I think I might have second thoughts about whether she had bound feet. And not only that, she didn't take any crap. So if someone was going in there uh, with any chance of threatening her business or herself, she took matters into her own hands. I appreciate that. And this is another reason why I thought this was a pretty good story and a pretty cool real life historical figure. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, she's taken into court, and in this this reporter's story of the court scene, there's an interpreter who's there so that Atoy can understand and she can give her testimony. But at some point, I'm not sure why, the interpreter is deemed to be insufficient. So um, this is actually rather upsetting to Atoy and leads to an outburst in the courtroom. Okay, so the interpreter didn't understand English sufficiently well, and another interpreter was sent for. Miss Atoy appeared to be highly incensed at this conclusion, and making a general onslaught upon the court, counsel, prisoner, and all, said in her peculiarly musical voice, "You likey thief man? You likey stealy you pin? You a very bad man." I have to pause here because it's good to know that um, in the 1840s and 50s, when the British were in Hong Kong, the merchants on the British side and the merchants on the Chinese side weren't able to communicate. And so they formed this language called, basically, it's like a merchant language, Pidgin Chinese or Pidgin English. And nowadays, it sounds kind of racist. And so when I first read this quote, when I was doing my research, I thought, oh my God, how am I going to put this into the book? Because this sounds awful, like a caricature from like some cartoon in the 30s or 40s. But after doing a little more research about this merchant language, which isn't really used anymore, and how they would mash Chinese and English together and use certain Chinese sentence structures with English words, it actually turns out this may have been kind of accurate. And so that's why I feel okay reading it right now. So I just wanted to give you that note. Anyway, so she's yelling at everyone in this courtroom. That man stealing my pen. He ought be hanged. Miss Atoy's voice rose to so high a pitch that even the clerk, who is usually very cool under such circumstances, was considerably frightened and looked very much alarmed over the top of his spectacles. The court took a recess and sent for the interpreter, during which time Miss Atoy opened all her artillery upon Colonel James, counsel for the prisoner. You know Tinky dat man Teefy, because he give you some money, said she, and then enlarged upon the corruption in the legal profession generally. The colonel, being naturally a good-natured man, took it all very easily. She's back in court in 1852. She had a run-in with a vigilante and suffered some domestic abuse and was in court to prosecute him. Then she was in court later that same year for defending a woman who she knew who beat up her man for cheating on her. Oh, and there's more. In 1852, in August, there was another man similar to Norman Ah Singh who was going around trying to extort prostitutes, and she took him to court and said no. Then Norman Ah Singh, our friend, the neighborhood boss, was accused of being in a triad or a gang, and she testified against him. In 1854, she was cited for a disorderly house again. In 1858, disturbing the peace. 1859, just prostitution in general, I guess. And an interesting one in July 1859, knocking on windows, which some of the lower class brothels, which we think maybe she was a part of at that point, which I'll explain a little bit later. But people would walk down these alleys and these girls would sit in the windows and knock on them, trying to get their attention, saying, "Hey, come on in, come on in." Uh, she was cited for knocking on windows. Okay. At some point in the mid 1850s, her business is still growing, and she realizes that she needs more girls in her brothel. So she gets on the ship and she does the reverse trip, stops in Hawaii for supplies, and all the way back to Hong Kong, and Canton. All right. And there she is. She lands in Hong Kong. She sees a lot of poverty. And one of the big things that she does is she finds girls and either kidnaps them, she either buys them, um, or she negotiates some sort of deal with the parents because at that time, Hong Kong and China in general was under a rebellion called the Taiping Rebellion. And that was a time when there was an incredible poverty because of natural disasters, there was war. And so there was a real dilemma there. Atoy in this book, and I have the scene marked, but because of time, I'm not going to get into it. But there is a scene where she's arguing with Cyrus, our teenager, and he can't believe that she's doing this. You're stealing these girls, you're buying these girls, you're kidnapping them. And she says, no, it's not like that. They wouldn't otherwise have a chance to survive. They would otherwise starve. And so you get into this moral dilemma. Is she actually helping these girls, or is she condemning them to a life of servitude and prostitution? It's a question that's hard to answer, and it's one that I tried to grapple with in this book, and what makes her legacy a little more complicated. I'm going to move on a little bit. These are not the children that she kidnapped, but these are some children in the early 1900s, which shows that, yes, this was a problem. Kids were being kidnapped, bought, sold, sent into servitude, prostitution, slavery. And yes, these are young kids. And yes, a lot of the prostitutes and servants that were being sent out of China were quite young. Atoy and her business really start to flounder in the late 1850s because um, these triads, these gangs, a lot of organized crime starts to get into the prostitution business and just drives her out. And in the mid to late 1850s, it turns out that she has lost, pretty much everything and is quite poor and depressed about it. In just a quick newspaper clip from 1855, Miss Autoy, well known to all who have visited San Francisco, recently endeavored to commit suicide by swallowing a large quantity of opium. I'm going to skip down. It is said that Autoy, though formerly wealthy, is now very poor and expressed herself that she has no desire to live in poverty. By the late 1850s, early 1860s, we think that she was out of San Francisco. And then the craziest part, 70 years go by, 7 whole decades go by, where we hear absolutely nothing from her. And as a researcher, that was very frustrating because I want to know, okay, where did she go next? Uh, did she reset up her business? What happened? Did she go back to China? Give me something. Nothing shows up until 1928 when her obituary surfaces in the Oakland Tribune. Now, there are some clues in here. It says that she did go to San Jose and she was living in Alviso, just north of San Jose, and known as China Mary of Alviso. It says here that she had children, which was very interesting, but I couldn't find any more information about that. And she was making a living selling clams to tourists. At 99 years old, she lived through all kinds of history. She lived through the Civil War. She lived through the Chinese Exclusion Act, industrialization, the 1906 earthquake, the invention of the automobile, World War I. Luckily, didn't quite make it to the Great Depression, but 99 years, 70 of which we have no clue what she was doing. But we do know that those first 20 to 29 years or so of her life, she led this incredible existence, um, either not only just surviving the San Francisco rough and tumble life, but thriving as a Chinese female immigrant, taking white men to court and using their court system to prosecute them when she felt that she was being cheated. Really incredible. And that's one of the many reasons why I thought this story was so cool and wanted to research it. I'll just show you that I did locate her burial spot, which is in San Jose at um, in a cemetery called Oak Hill Cemetery. Um, you can see, actually, if I click there, there she is, buried right there in the third row from the bottom. I went there, and this is what I saw. Just green grass. There are no markers. There's no lines. There's really no anything except just for that map that I had. So I took a picture of kind of the area that I thought she might be in. And that's really the best that I've got uh, about where she was. Okay, I'm going to wrap this thing up because I know you have other stuff to get to. But I wanted to leave you with this question one more time. Is Atoy admirable? And you can answer that any way you want. Um, she did a lot of really great things. She was strong. She showed no fear. She prosecuted when she thought she was unjustly treated. On the other hand, she was a part of the human sex trafficking trade. That's not something you can easily wipe away and say, hey, she was a great person. The reasons that she did that, yes, for money, but maybe it helped the girls, maybe not. That's really up to you to decide. So I want to end there. And I know Tina has some questions that she wanted to ask in these last few minutes. But I want to encourage you, if you haven't gotten a shot, let's see, what is this going to show up? Nope. I will stop sharing my screen, but I did want to put this. I don't know if I can. This shows up. This is my book called The Boy and the Brothel Madam. It's on Amazon, and I appreciate you giving me a chance to share today, and I hope the rest of your community day goes well. And Tina, you have some questions for me.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh my God, Mrs. Cilker, thank you so much. You brought 1849 San Francisco to life in such a thoughtful way. So thank you. And I really appreciate hearing the story behind your book. And for me, I'm always interested in San Francisco history and strong Asian women. So thank you for giving us light of day. So, one
Oh yeah.
question is, how did you come about to write a historical fiction rather than direct history? And then
That's
the
a great
second
question.
question is, can you send us a link to your book and how we can follow Mr. Silker's next journey in your authorship?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. I actually started this book as historical nonfiction, so I wanted this to be something in the style of I don't know if you've heard of the author Eric Larson. He does a really his big popular book is Devil in the White City, and I loved that style of taking something that's nonfiction with real characters and giving life to them and telling a story that way. And I wanted to do the same thing with Ah Toy. The problem that I was coming across was two things. One, even though there was a lot of great research about her, it wasn't enough to fill a novel. And second, um, part of Larson's style is to give a voice to the person. And I was running into issues with trying to get inside Atoy's head and try to figure out what she was thinking. And if you're doing nonfiction, you have to be really careful with that because she didn't leave any diaries behind. She didn't leave any primary sources. So it was really a leap to try to predict or understand what she would have said or done in a situation. For historical fiction, it means that I have a little bit more flexibility and leeway. And so that's why I switched over to fiction. So even though many of the characters are historical figures, I can write them in a way that is close to what they would have said or done, but it doesn't have to be exactly word for word.
Yeah, thank you for answering that
Sorry I
question.
cut out there a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, can you send the audience a link, direct link to your book?
I can do that.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
it'd be great.
through
Through the
is that a
chat?
comment that I can make? Oh, there it
Yes,
is. Okay.
yes, yes.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that right before I sign off.
Yep. And then just for the audience, if the book is not in your library, you can ask your local library to order it.
You can. It might be a bit of a challenge because libraries have limited space, and uh, I'm not a very well-known author. In fact, this is just my debut. So you get me as a new author. Congratulations, everyone.
Yes.
And I wish that I could be there in person so I could shake everyone's hand for being on this call, but I'll have to do this for now and say thank you.
Thank you so much. And how do we follow you? If we want to follow you, would be
Hmm.
on Medium.
Yes, I have a couple places you can follow me. One is through this blogging site called Medium, and I can put my link there as well. I have a website that I update from time to time, and I'll give you that. And I also have an email list that I send out about once a week, maybe every other week or so, with not just toy stuff, but with just US history musings and research that I found along the way. And um, on my website, you can sign up and receive some historical emails as well. And I'll put that all in the comments.
Thank you. And then one more question from the audience. What is the age range do you recommend for your book?
Mm, an excellent question. Um, I would say minimum age 16, even though the content is around a brothel. There are a couple scenes that suggest sexual activity. It doesn't get graphic. And I think a 16-year-old could read it just fine and know kind of what's going on, but not be scandalized. My son is 14 and he wanted to read it, and I was very touched by his support. So I let him. I didn't really have any problem with him reading it. I was wondering if he would pick up on some of the innuendo. I haven't asked him yet if he has, so maybe I'm a little bit afraid to. But definitely, I think 16 should be a safe age.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Cilker. We so
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thanks for having me, and I appreciate everyone who stood to the bitter end to watch. Thank you, and I'll put stuff in the comments here.
Yep. And I will also, whatever you sent, I will also send it to the audience via email.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
Thank you.